If you're listening to me and it's in the evening, I'm going to ask you a question, or maybe whatever time it is that you're listening to me. If you look back at how the day has been for you today, let me ask you this. Is there a time that you set aside to deliberately consider things, either to review or just to think? Pen and paper, blank pen and paper, and you're just thinking either about the day or the week or your life or whatever project it is that is going on, and that time is specifically set aside for you to think. Very few people answer that in the affirmative. Actually, extremely very few people answer that in the affirmative. And the reason is because we are living in total distracted world. We're totally distracted by things, either personal or external, internal or external, and they are taking away the most productive time of our day and the most productive activity, which is thinking. And I want us to continue talking about thinking and thinking long at that in this episode. Stay tuned.
Welcome to the Life Signatures podcast with Lawrence Namale. Lawrence is a life coach, author, and keynote speaker who loves to tackle different topics on purpose, productivity, and resilience. His mission in life is to awaken all your boundless possibilities available in you. Life Signatures podcast is dedicated to bring to reality every single person who knows that deep down in their gut, there's got to be more to life than this. And now, here is your host, Lawrence Namale.
Well, here is the deal. If you and I are not going to be deliberate and intentional about thinking, it is not going to happen. Thinking that I'm talking about is one deliberate thing that cannot happen arbitrarily. There is nothing arbitrary about thinking, especially the thinking that is going to result into impact and creativity and productivity and contribution and value and problem solving. It is not going to be an arbitrary thing. And by the way, the mind itself, the way it's been structured to be very versatile, to improve with every level of thinking, to grow with every level of thinking. And therefore, there's nothing like a mind growing old. In fact, the older you grow, maybe the more years you have, the more versatile the mind is, the more sharp the mind is. I learned this through a medical doctor called Sanjay Gupta, who probably does work with CNN, or by the time I was reading him, he was doing work with CNN, that the more you grow older, the better your brain becomes, especially if that brain has been put into activity. And one of the biggest activities we can put the brain into, it is the activity of deliberate thinking. I'm not talking about thinking, where is my food going to come from? I'm talking about the deliberate thinking that talks about value and impact and problem solving and creation of stuff in life today. We seldom do that. And you know why we seldom do that? We seldom do that because we have so much activities going on, so much distractions going on. When you wake up, the day is already covered even before you know it. And by the way, even when there is time available for us to do stuff, we've found out through technological improvement, found out some things that we can be able to do to dull the mind, like watching TV. Okay, like just sitting there and binge watching series, or just sitting there and discussing stuff on social media, just scrolling through social media. We found ways to make our brains dull. And you might think that, if someone woke up from the Renaissance today, they might look at us and think that we're the most brilliant human beings ever. The guys who are living in the analog era, they might think we are the most brilliant human beings. Let me tell you, we've come to this digital era where we are the dullest people there ever were, because we don't engage the mind, we don't think. We just, it is pathetic. We just go through the motions and we just do things that dull the mind. Even in the education systems that we have, what have we done? We've reduced it to such an extent that people don't even think. Instead of thinking, they cram. They just assimilate things that they can be able to replicate on paper at the end of the day. There is absolutely no thinking. There's no consideration. Therefore, there's this thing called herd mentality, where there is people being hoodwinked by either a politician or a religious person because they cannot think for themselves. I love the scriptures. The Bible tells us that you should carefully trust yourself in your faith to your God and be ready to give an answer when you are asked, why is it that you believe the way you're believing? That means that you don't just believe for the sake of believing because someone said so. In fact, the Bible tells us that how will they know if someone sent to them? And how will someone be sent to them if they are not sent, if they're not given an opportunity? How will they believe if nobody preaches to them? In other words, the preaching comes and then the interpretation follows and then the decision is made. That's how life is supposed to be structured. In other words, the mind is supposed to be engaged in as many things as possible. I came through a very powerful quote by Roy Ten Bennett, and I'm just going to read it. He says, don't just learn, experience. What does that tell you about your education system? Did you experience, or you just go through learning? He says, don't just learn, experience. Don't just read, absorb. And that, it needs the brain to be activated. Don't just read, absorb. He says, don't just change, transform. In other words, participate in the change itself. He says, don't just relate, advocate. Don't just, nod your head in mental assent. Imbibe the thing that you are assenting mentally to and become an advocate for it. Participate in life. That takes thinking. He says, don't just promise, prove. He says, don't just criticize, encourage. Don't just think. He says, ponder. Don't just take, give. Don't just see, feel also. Don't just dream, do. Don't just hear, listen. Don't just talk, act. Don't just tell, show. Don't just exist, live. Don't just exist, live. And that takes the activation of the mind. It takes the activation of the brain. The question today, even as we're tackling it in this series, is this: are we really thinking? The real work for any human being, and this is the biggest equalizer ever, the real work is thinking. I'm told, and I know it's normally said in jest by motivational speakers, that the man who is selling eggs and the man who is building an airline, they are using the same brain. And it is true. One is thinking, both of them are thinking, but the level of pondering, the level of thinking is totally different. I've learned over the years, friends, that the more you think, the more you think. The less you think, the less you don't think. Oh, what a powerful quote that is. I'm going to quote it myself. The more you think, the more you think. The less you think, the more you don't think. In other words, keep engaging that brain and it becomes better and better. And therefore you can start with selling eggs. You are better off than the guy who is seated on the streets waiting for someone to drop a coin in the bowl, and they are healthy, they are strong, they can do stuff for themselves. So you start thinking and you start selling eggs, and as you sell eggs, the thinking continues. The muscle of thinking strengthens and it brings more ideas, and you meet more people and they tell you more things, and you see how you can scale. And before you know it, you started with PayPal and then you sold it. Now you're sending people on the moon. because you were thinking. You see, it means that if we don't take time to think, at the end of it all, our life will have been spent on matters simply related to the mundane survival, to us. Airtime, fuel in the car, curtains on the window, electricity, bills, and a few chicken dates here and there. That's just about it. You see, I think that we do not do so much, to be honest, because we do not think long. Peter J. Daniels is an Australian billionaire that I have been referencing him very many times, and in the episode that ended yesterday, I told you about his preference. He was saying that if there was a way that they did brain surgery, he would ask for the brain of a Christian, because Christians don't really think a lot. And it's not just Christians who don't think, it's quite a number of people who don't think. But this billionaire, he's a guy who doesn't have a degree, and he says he's glad he never had the misfortune of going to a university. He's consulted with business people, become an honorarian ambassador to many countries. He's been a mentor to presidents and so on. They asked him, what makes you successful? One day, I think he was 80 years old or something. What really makes you successful? This is what he said. He said, I schedule time to think. In fact, I reserve one day a week on my calendar just to think. All of my money-making ideas and ventures started with the days I took off to think. I used to lock myself away in a den and just give strict instructions to my family that under no circumstances should I be disturbed. Quote end. He did that so that he can think, and is attributing his success to the fact that he went away to think. We need to learn from this guy. We need to start activating our minds. We need to start thinking with our lives. We need to start doing this activity that is easily accessed to any one of us at a moment's notice, just like that. But I know that it will need for us to learn, because we've not been thinking a lot. And therefore, when you get started, it's going to be tedious, laborious. Your mind is going to start thinking about chicken, about your girlfriend, about this, about that, and you're going to want to touch your phone and go through your social media and so on. You want to continue watching a movie, you're going to take some water. Because Paul Fix told us that the reason as to why many people get lost in their thinking, it's because it is unfamiliar territory. But it is time for us to redeem that territory and make it our very own territory, and we start by thinking. In fact, I'm going to start giving us some benefits of thinking. In fact, some benefits of thinking long at that. I want to see what comes out of it. But you already know what it is. The Bible tells us that the race is not for the swift, nor the battle for the strong, but time and chance are given to everyone. And everyone has an opportunity to think. The Bible also says that God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we can think. In other words, it is useless what God can do if we can't think. Imagine. As in, He is able to do all those stuff, but it is tied to our level of thinking. And the good news is this, that any thought that I do have, any idea that I do have, God is able to do it exceedingly abundantly above what I have just thought. The question is, am I thinking? That is the question that I need to ponder on this week, and you need to ponder on this week and even today. And let us have a discipline or an idea where we can set aside some time to simply do what? To simply think. One of the reasons as to why people don't think is because nobody pays them for that. People only do things because there is money in it. Is there money in it? Is there money in it? If there is no money in it, they don't do it. Thinking has a lot of money in there. And the reason as to why we do thinking is not just to get money. is to become better human beings. To actually be human is to think. I'm going to continue discussing these things in the next episode, but until then, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Life Signatures Radio. If you enjoyed today's show, subscribe to Life Signatures Radio on iTunes, Stitcher, or visit our website at lifesignatures.libsyn.com. Life Signatures Radio, fresh, clean, and inspiring.